need to give this lady a hand. She does. Okay, we're going to sit in our signs here.
Right here, right over there.
If you have your Bibles this morning, go with me to Isaiah chapter 55. As I mentioned, we're going to start the new series today on real faith, and we'll see. In the midst of real life. So when you have those hyper moments, that's real life. Do you have the faith that's going to sustain you? In Isaiah chapter 55, God instantly says to us something that may rattle you, something that you may not particularly care for, but it's a reminder of that statement that we use around here all the time. He's God, and what? We're not.
Amen.
And so here's what he declares. My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. We live out our life in an altered universe, a fallen universe. That God created the heavens and the earth and declared it all good, but through the sinfulness of Adam and Eve, sin has come into our world, and we live now in this altered universe. Every person must die. So sickness came into the world. Pain and suffering because of sin has come into life. Some of these are consequences of our own sin. Sometimes people become hurt because of the sins of other people. But life happens because of this altered universe. And it happens to all people, whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, according to Jesus. But here, God reminds us that he just doesn't see things the way we see things. After Daddy died, I did a research project on death. I researched over 360 verses in the Bible that was on death with the plans to write something, which I've never done. But one of the verses that really just struck out to me the most, that I continue to use now in about every funeral that I do, Psalm 116, that precious in the sight of God is the death of his saints. That God doesn't see death the way we see death. So God doesn't see these things the way we see things. To God, he's always looking at the opportunity to draw us to himself. He's always looking for the opportunity to glorify himself and to glorify himself upon a lost world. And so God is always at work in ways that we can't often see. But today I want to talk about real life, and when these things happen into your life, if you're a normal person, that confusion and conflict sets in. Now, you may be one of the greatest saints in the world. You may be one of the strongest Christians in the world. But when reality hits, it's going to shake you. And confusion will come, and a spiritual conflict will come. And I want you to understand today that's normal. For it not to happen would be abnormal. And I want to tell you the story today of Job. If I was God, I would not put the story of Job in the Bible. But he did, and he put it there for a reason. But if you know the story of Job, it starts out telling us about Job himself, that he's upright, he's blameless, that he feared God, and he shunned evil. He was a man of integrity. Because of that, he gets caught up with a situation between Satan and God, where Satan comes to God and says, you know, people only worship you, people only follow you because you bless them. Take away their blessing, they'll curse you. And it's God who says, well, have you considered my servant Job? He's a man who fears me, who shuns evil, a man of integrity. And so Satan is given the permission in chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Job to attack Job. Now this is interesting. If you actually read chapter 1 and you begin to see the disasters that come in Job's life, if you actually read through that, it takes 39 seconds. And it tells you a messenger came, and before that messenger finished, another messenger came, and another messenger came. And as you read what the messengers say, 39 seconds. And Job pretty much lost it all. And you and I use this phrase all the time. You can hear somebody who just lost their home in a fire and said, I've lost it all. But you haven't lost it all because you're still standing there. Your family's still standing there. You still got your car. You still got your money in the bank. You know, you still got your credit cards. You still got these things. You haven't lost it all. Job probably came as close as anybody to actually losing it all. So in 39 seconds, he hears the news that all of his livestock has been stolen or killed. Not only all of his livestock, which of course he was the richest man in the world, so this was his livelihood, it was all gone. The crops were destroyed. All the servants who manned the crops and manned the livestock, they were killed. He found out that his camels had been stolen. All the other servants in his home had been killed. And then he receives the final blow. His 10 children were all gathered together in the same house, and the storm came, and all of his 10 kids are dead. All 10 kids are dead. And then on another day, we're told, which is probably the next day, that because he did not curse God and die, he is personally afflicted, from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet, covered with boils. At first, Job seemed so righteous. If you look at chapter 1, verse 20 of Job, this is his response after those 39 seconds and finding out all his wealth was gone, his kids were gone, his servants were gone, all of these things. Job says this, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. May the name of the Lord be praised. How many of man, that is extremely spiritual. Well, a lot of people leave that story with Job there. And they don't read the rest of the book of Job. And so you begin to think this is the way you're supposed to act. This is the way life is supposed to be. When heartaches come, you're just, Lord gives, Lord takes away. Now, Mrs. Job probably had a better reaction. What did Mrs. Job say?
Curse God and die.
Just curse God and die. In fact, she's over it. She was over God. But then when you begin to read chapter 3 and read it through chapter 37, you begin to see this story today of confusion and conflict, this roller coaster ride spiritually of ups and downs. Turn to Job chapter 3, verse 1. Now I want you to understand that by the time you get to Job chapter 3, he's got 3 friends that comes to visit him. We call them jokingly Job's comforters. And they were not good advisors, but they were pretty good friends because they came and they sat with Job, and it says for 7 days. No one said a word. They all sat waiting for Job to speak first. How many of you have a friend that would sit with you for 1 day without saying a word? How many of us have a friend that could sit with us 1 hour without saying a word? For 7 days, no one spoke, including Job. Now remember, Job, Lord gives, Lord takes away. But now we're told for the next 7 days, he does not speak. He is in a world of confusion. He's in a world of spiritual conflict. And when he finally speaks after 7 days, he opened his mouth and he cursed the day of his birth. Is that a little different than what we read earlier? The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. He cursed the day of his birth. And then it's on. Now these 3 friends, they had a couple of good things that they offered to him. They did encourage him, at least try to encourage him. They tried to remind him of perspective. They tried to remind him that, Job, you have been one of these wonderful guys that's gone around and helped others and encouraged others when they were going through hard times. And you need to remember the things that you told other people. They reminded him that resentment kills a fool, envy slaves the simple. They appealed to him to lay all of his needs before God. That's good stuff, but here's the problem with all of their advice. They lived in a time, and this time follows all the way through the time of Jesus in the New Testament, where so many of the people, particularly among the Jews, considered anything bad that happened to you had to be the result of sin. And so the worse the sin, the worse God's punishment upon you. So this also meant to be blessed meant you had God's favor. So they understood, Job being the richest man in the East, God had blessed him. And so he had the favor of God, but now Job must have really done something something to really tick God off. Now, what could you do to tick God off that you lose everything that you own, including your 10 children? And so they're insistent. They're insistent. Job, sin, 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 sin. And Job is insistent, I have not sinned. Remember, the scripture tells us he was a man who feared God and shunned evil. Now, you see the same thing happening in John chapter 9. Remember in John chapter 9, Jesus heals a man who was blind from birth. You remember the story? And the question is asked, who sinned? This man, which is interesting because if he was blind from birth, he would have had to commit a sin in the womb. So did he sin? Or was his blindness the result of sins of his parents? And Jesus says this has nothing to do with this man nor his parents. This has nothing to do with sin. It's all about God's glory. But this was the environment. This is what these guys were all about. And so this is the rest of their time with him, that he was being injured by God. He was being punished by God. He was reaping what he sowed. And so we see Job's inward struggle of confusion. 7 days of silence. In chapter 3, it had been better for me to have died at birth than to live. In chapter 6, he says, my misery, if weighed, would outweigh the sands of the sea. In chapter 7, he asked God, God, why have you made me your target? Now let me ask you an honest question. How many of you have ever felt that way? God, why are you picking on me? God, why are you making me your target? Chapter 10 verse through chapter 25, you see 5 major things of shift that Job talks about. He felt God no longer cared about him. He felt there was no hope. He felt like he had become an enemy of God. He began to distort the wicked people around him, that all the wicked people had it made. People like him. This is a Psalm 73 moment. And there was just no justice because the wicked had it good and the righteous like him was being treated this way. But now he also had moments of hope in the midst of that. You see some of those moments. He asked who can understand the greatness of God. He asked why this man had ignored God and the coming judgment of God. He said, what really defines true happiness? Do you have to have all this stuff to have happiness? And he says everybody should develop and maintain a life of integrity. So you see that roller coaster. Spiritually up, spiritually down. On the mountain, moments of glimmers of hope, and then back down to reality. So here's the point I want to make with you today, to start the series. Because we all have been guilty as Christians of being spiritual when we didn't need to be spiritual. We like to use spiritual cliches. We think it sounds spiritual, it feels spiritual. You know, so something happens in your life, and even to hear the words in the midst of that storm of somebody saying, which is true, that God knows what he's doing, God is at work, is not something you want to hear. In fact, they've done a survey and they found that when you lose someone that you love, the best thing anybody can say to you, I'm sorry. If there's anything I can do to help you, please let me know. But that's not how Christians roll. Christians want to tell us how that person is in a better place. And you know in your heart of hearts they're in a better place, but what you're dealing with is a simple fact of what? They're not here. And particularly if they were taken in some type of tragic fashion, then everything becomes complicated. And so we kind of have those moments like the comforters. It sounds good, but it's really not even doing it to others the way we'd like others to do to us. We're just trying to help somebody in the midst of what we know is a hard time to get some help, but we're not always being helpful. See, a lot of us have grown up, even in the church, and we feel like it's wrong to question God. We feel that it's wrong to make any type of what would be a quote-unquote negative comment to God. I remember praying at an altar years ago in Salt City First, and I was laying there, I was telling God everything I thought, and I was telling him a few things I didn't even think about. And I got up, I kicked the altar. I was just mad, I just kicked the altar. I went back to my office. Now, if somebody has seen that, if one of you has seen that, some of you even hearing it, say, man, that's terrible. That's, if you think of you, just hang him, let's kick him out of here. But I was in one of those seasons. See, everybody else may have rebuked you, but the person who never rebuked me was who? God. He understood. I'm sure it didn't please him, but he understood. What I want to get to us today on this point to begin the series is what's on your screen. It's okay to not be okay. Mm-hmm. But listen to me carefully. For a season. For a season. Yes, sir. So say it with me. It's okay not to be okay, but for a season. There's a time when abnormal does become abnormal. But even when you come through the storm, as you heard Keith's testimony, one of the things that becomes redefined in your life is this, that you're not coming back to normal. You're coming to a new normal. Keith's life is a new normal. So it's not back to what it was. Even the story of Job, people come back to the last chapter of Job and say, oh, but God restored him. Well, let's talk about God restoring him. God restored his wealth, and so he got his wealth back, and he even had 10 more kids. But let me tell you what he didn't get back. The 10 kids he lost. You ever think he got over the pain and the hurt of losing those 10 children simply because he had 10 new kids? It was a new normal. I like what C.S. Lewis said. He writes about that his wife was dying of cancer. Listen to what he says. Now remember, C.S. Lewis was an atheist who came to Christ. So this is later on in his life. So he writes now, I'm not in danger of ceasing to believe in God. That's not the danger for me going through this, watching my wife die of cancer. The real danger is I might start believing terrible things about God. The conclusion that I dread is I might not say there's no God after all, but worse, I might say, is this really what God is like? He's a terrible God. See, that's real stuff. Those are the type of things real people go through in the midst of real struggles in real life, where you're struggling with your faith, where you're looking for the glimmers of hope, where you're trying to hang on. There's an old gospel song that says, when you're hanging by a thread. What might change? So let me share with you quickly 3 things that causes part of our confusion. Again, you and I are living our faith out in the worst place possible, and that's in America. America is wimps when it comes to spiritual things. We know that. We're spoiled brats. We've all got everything we want. We've got far more than we ever need. And so we have our set of expectations of what life is supposed to be good. And we don't handle tragedy well. We don't handle disruptions well. But part of this is because, number one, just humanly, we don't want pain and discomfort in our life. See, when I read comments like Paul, who says, I want to suffer where I can suffer like Christ, I'm sitting there saying, Paul, you're not normal. Who wants to suffer? Paul Paul saw something in a greater fashion than what we see. He understood something in a whole different light than what we would understand. He was wanting to experience God in a whole different way. But we don't want pain and discomfort. We have a fear of what we will lose. I mean, women and dads, from the moment you found out you were pregnant, how many of you lived in fear? All the things that could go wrong during the pregnancy, what might happen. Then the baby, you got SIDS, you got all these other things. And Lord, it really never stops, does it? Because now they're teenagers and they're out of the house, and how many of you can sleep until they're back home? You continue to go through those type of things because we have this natural fear in our life of what we might lose. But then we have our expectations. Things that before we were Christians that we would not throw us into that type of confusion. You could have found out that you had cancer, you could have had your stroke, you could have lost your leg from diabetes, your child could have gotten killed. All of these things could have happened to you, of course, as a non-Christian, but you would not be asking the question, why God? Because God would not be a part of your life. That would not be an expectation of God supposed to protect you and keep you safe and bless you and keep His favor upon you. But now we're Christians. We're His children, right? I know the plans I have to prosper you, to bless you. So we develop our expectations as Christians, and now we're living out our faith in the midst of the explosion throughout our society, spiritually, with this stupid health and wealth theology. And it's everywhere. 90% of the preachers that you watch on TV, that many of you watch, they're health and wealth theology preachers. And they're telling you that God wants you to be healed. God wants you to be wealthy. So God must have a problem with most of us in this room, doesn't He? Because if you're wealthy, you're hiding it. And if you're not healthy, that's pretty hard to hide. So it does this great damage to us. There's so many people walking away from the faith today because their faith doesn't have the foundation to deal with this health and wealth, and God seemingly to turn it back upon. When I hear somebody say, God, why? I think that's something that we need to tread carefully with. And God's a big God. He can take whatever you have to say and He understands it as an explained whole thing. But it does occur to me that, we're not great people of praise. I mean, how many of you got out of your car this morning, we got to church and said, Lord, thank you for protecting me? Not even a thought for us, was it? How many of us got out of bed this morning and said, God, thank you for giving me another new day? How many of us went to our closet and said, oh, Lord, thank you that I have something to choose to wear? How many of us went to the breakfast table and said, Lord, thank you, I have something to eat? We got into the car and said, okay, Lord, I need you to protect me. Thank you that, hey, Lord, thank you for the car, God. Thank you that I got gas in the car. Thank you that, hey, we just don't live our life that way, right? But as soon as something bad happens, we're ready to throw God under the bus and blame Him for everything wrong in our life. Ignore Him for all the good, but blame Him for everything that's bad. We need to tread carefully. Like I said, it's okay not to be okay for a season. When we talk about grieving, and most of you know what that's like, how long should a person grieve? Well, the answer generally is as long as it takes. Because everybody grieves differently. Everybody copes with things differently. But there does come a point where it could become abnormal, where it becomes unhealthy. Okay not to be okay for a season, but understanding there's going to be a different norm that comes in. So over the next 2 weeks at least, we're going to talk about how God still moves. We're going to talk about how Romans 8:28 is still true. That God does work for the good to those who love Him. God is at work. In the midst of the things that you and I don't even understand, but we don't even think that God may be close or even care, that God is doing something. He is at work. But understanding a new norm is going to take place. I want to close this morning reading a story, which is kind of a weird story, but it just kind of struck me in a different way in the book I was reading. And it's about the boll weevil. And you're going to say, well, what's a boll weevil got to do with me? Well, probably not a lot. It's the response to things that happen in life that we're going to talk about. So I want you to get this in your mind. This takes us back to the late 1890s, early 1900s, when the boll weevil made its way into the United States from Mexico. So let me just read it. It takes us back to Enterprise, Alabama. I was just in Alabama last Sunday. I ain't going back to Alabama no more. They had a serious problem. Their entire economy rested on successfully growing cotton. But in the 1890s, these small beetles began to migrate from Mexico and began eating their way across the cotton fields of the South. They officially arrived in Alabama in 1910, and they ravished all of the cotton fields. We know this beetle as the boll weevil. And because of the plague of the boll weevils, the farmers faced certain bankruptcy, and their economy was all but lost. But one farmer in the midst of it was a visionary, and he saw the disaster might have an opportunity. So rather than just pack up his bags and surrender to the cotton-eating boll weevil, he listened to George Washington Carver, an agricultural scientist at the Tuskegee Institute, who told him to diversify his crops by planting peanuts, sweet potatoes, and soybeans. And by following Carver's advice, Enterprise, in contrast to the rest of the state, rebounded economically by 1917 with the largest peanut harvest in the nation. Now here's where it gets a little weird. Mr. Fleming, the local businessman, came up with the idea of building a monument to the boll weevil, effectively thanking the boll weevil for making them so prosperous. Now this monument still stands in Enterprise, Alabama today. It's 30 feet tall, and at the very top is a woman who almost looks like the woman of the Statue of Liberty. She was made in Italy, shipped to Alabama, dressed in a flowing gown. With her arms raised, she holds in her hands a platter on top of which is a large sculpture of the boll weevil. The monument was dedicated to the boll weevil on December 11, 1919. So it's been standing there now for 100 years. Imagine people erecting a monument to an agricultural pest. Did they forget about this desecration of their cotton fields? Did they forget about the bankruptcy it cost them? No. They saw the enormously positive effects that it had instigated on their town after the crisis was over. After the crisis was over. See, everything has a close, doesn't it? It may not be healed, may not be restored, but that crisis comes to a close. And you begin to find the new norm. We all are sitting here today, and we can look back in our life and see how God has worked. Things that we couldn't put together during the storm, but after a storm, how we can look and see God was at work. And we can see things that God had done. And how we're stronger and better, even though life may very well be different. So maybe in our life, we need to do some boll weevil searching. And we need to find how crisis in our life has actually made us stronger, made us better. But my point today that I want you to leave here today as Christian people, particularly particularly Christian people who've grown up in the holiness church, it's okay to what? Not feel
Okay.
forces. Let's pray. Their story